Thank you very much, everyone who has joined us today. I'm honored to have for our next Liberating Cinema Masterclass, Shyam Benegal, Master Director from India, joining us here today. He will talk to us, and then we'll have an opportunity to have a Q&A with him, where you can ask your questions. This event will be recorded, so it will go up on our YouTube afterwards and will be shared. So for those who couldn't attend now, you'll be able to catch up also after we have the masterclass. So I'll do a little bit of an introduction about Mr. Benegal, and then I'll allow him to kind of walk us through it and take it away. So I will say first that Mr. Benegal, so Shyam Benegal started his career with a job as a copywriter, which he will tell us more about. He has lectured at many institutions in India and abroad and participated in seminars on subjects dealing with cinema, television, information technology, and different aspects of social and cultural change. He has made 26 feature films for the cinema, several documentaries, and TV series, including a 53-hour TV series on the history of India. So, and I'd love to hear more about that too, but I'll let him decide. And practically all of his films have won national awards, and several of them have been awarded internationally. He was a Homi Baba Fellow from 1970 to 1972. He worked at the Children's Television with CTW in New York and associate producer at WGBH in Boston. And most recently, the government in India has conferred on him two of its most prestigious awards, including the Padma Shri in 1976, Padma Bhushan in 1991, as well as the Indira Gandhi National Integration Award 2004 and the Dadasaheb Phalke Award for Lifetime Achievement 2005. Finally, he was awarded a D.Lit from the Jamil Millia University in New Delhi and from the University of Calcutta. He's running a film production company in Mumbai, and he was a member of Parliament, Rajya Sabha, from 2006 to 2012, and is currently working on his new feature film. So this is kind of an introduction. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll let Mr. Benegal now introduce himself and start the masterclass. Thank you very much.
Well, let me start off by saying that I finished my college as I did a master's degree in economics and wanted to, actually I did that master's degree because I had no opportunities where I used to live, to be in films, because my primary interest was always the cinema. And I used to see every film that I could possibly see from different parts of the world whenever the opportunities occurred. But the most important thing, of course, was that the idea of cinema used to be very exciting to me. And my father, who was a professional photographer, had a 16 millimeter camera, film camera. And I used that to start making films of my own. So I started making films from almost the age of 12 years, And from then I made a couple of small films, 5 minutes, 6 minutes, and things like that. And then a whole film about family holidays, things like that. And so the interest in cinema grew. I didn't go to any film school because there was no film school where I was. But what I did, because I was working and because I was reading every single book that I could find, particularly relating to films and filmmaking and film editing and different kinds of things. There were several books that used to be published in English in Britain at that time. And those were the books that really helped me. And then, of course, the two great masters of Russian cinema, Pudovkin and Eisenstein, both of them had written books. And so all of that helped in my learning about the cinema. And so as I was growing up, I got a master's degree in economics, but I didn't want to teach. I didn't want to do anything in economics. So I came to Bombay because I grew up in Hyderabad. And in Bombay, I said, let me see what I can do here. And I joined advertising because that seemed to be the simplest thing to do, and to write copy in the copy department of the advertising agency. But within a few months, the agency I was working for also used to produce the largest number of advertising films. This is in the pre-television era. The advertising films used to be shown in cinemas. And so I decided, because I told the managing director of my company that, my primary interest actually is in the cinema. So why don't I work in the cinema department in producing films? So I started to make films. And within the next 4 or 5 years that I was with that agency, I made at least 800 advertising films. So I was shooting and writing all the time. So I did much more than I would have done in any film school. So, when I made all those advertising films, then I got a reputation for being a good advertising filmmaker. So there was another agency which I joined soon after, where I became the head of the film department. And by being head of the film department, and I had other opportunities as well, because, I used to make advertising films, but I could also, there was one of the conditions that I had made with the company I was working with, that they would allow me to make my own documentaries or films in my free time. That I would be working for the agency. And they were perfectly willing to accept that. So, which was a great advantage, because I was making advertising films. And then I was also making an occasional documentary. And I started making documentary films. Most of them used to be, socio-anthropological kind of documentary. I made a film on tribals of central India and films of that nature, because we used to have, Government of India used to run in their Ministry of Information and Broadcasting something called Films Division, which used to show documentaries week after week in cinemas all over the country. And for that, they required documentaries on different subjects. And, I'm talking about now in 1960s. We were recently an independent country, and then we had taken upon, that the country had taken upon itself to introduce different parts of it to everybody. We are such a diverse country that to understand our different diversities, our languages, our different kinds of cultures and subcultures and so on and so forth. The films division was there to make films about different parts of India. For instance, we would make films about the northeastern part of India, like places like Manipur, Mizoram, places like this, which the rest of India didn't really know, or states in southern India, which nobody knew anything about in northern India, things of that nature. So we had a whole bunch of films that were being made at that time, which gave an opportunity for young people like myself to make the kind of films I wanted. So I went to part of central India and made a film about a tribe, because it's the heart of tribal India. And I made a film about a particular tribe, and in a place where the last person who had gone, who was not a part of the government, that is, government visitors to that part of the country, but the other person who'd gone was an anthropologist about 35 years before I had gone there, a man called Dr. Vega Elwin, who was a very famous anthropologist. So I went and made a film there. And that got me seriously interested, and gave me opportunities, because I had made all these advertising films, I was making these documentaries, and looking forward to making a feature. And I was hoping that I would make a feature. And I had kept writing scripts all the time. And finally, I found somebody who would give me an opportunity to make a film, which I did, which was my very first film, Ankur, which was made in 1973. After that, of course, there was no looking back, because I gave up my job in advertising. I became a full-fledged filmmaker, an independent filmmaker, and made a living by doing advertising films. But for my own satisfaction, I made feature films. So one after the other, then I started, because I was not kind of wanting to make a lot of money, people would still trust me with their money to make features, but I wouldn't overspend and all sorts of things like that. So I made one film after another, all the way until I made 30 odd films through my career. So basically, that's what it has been. It's been a journey through, through the making of films over the last half a century. So that's what I've been doing. And I don't think there's anything more to say except this as a background information about myself. And I think in this process, while doing all this, there was also a period when I got involved in film education in the country because the government of India, the Ministry of Information Broadcasting, under which there is a film school in Pune in India, but they decided that, maybe I should head that institution. I said I wouldn't want to do that, but I became a chairman of that institution for a while. So I got involved in teaching film. Although it wasn't directly, I was not a teacher as such, but by being chairman, it meant that one could think in terms of, designing film education policy, as it were. Apart from the general having a hand in creating a kind of curriculum and a whole syllabus for film education in the country. And that was an interesting time because television was coming into the country at that time. And the film institution itself, the Pune Film Institute, was becoming an institution also to teach television. So it was Film and Television Institute rather than a simple film institute. So, and my own involvement after that, because we got less and less, television came and much less and less opportunities to make a film for the cinemas. So you had to start working, more and more for television. But I had no interest in doing soap operas. And because I had no interest in doing soap operas, because that's the most popular on television, I decided that I would probably start to do things that would not fit into a cinema, but fit into a television thing. And so I decided to do a history of India, a series on the history of India, based on the first Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, who had written a book called Discovery of India. And that was a very interesting book because it was a great introduction or reintroduction of India for ourselves. Because it was written, he had written it when he was in jail. It was his last prison stay just before India became independent. So he knew that, once he was out of jail, India would soon become free. And therefore he was working out in his own mind, what India should be, what its destiny is, and what its past was. So he wrote a book of history, really. But it was a kind of personal history. And it was called The Discovery of India. And so I made a whole series, a 53-hour series on that particular book, which was in fact a kind of history of India because we added more, his was a very subjective view. We decided to make it more objective by getting several well-known historians involved in the making of this series, in terms of the script, in terms of getting an overall picture of how the history of India actually evolved, over a period of time. Because we are not a simple country. We are a subcontinent. And, we have many, many different kinds of people. So naturally, we not only have a single history, but we have many histories. And so to contain all those many histories, just as Nehru had Discovery of India, I made something called Bharatik Coach. And that was a series that also became quite popular on television because television at that time had just become national. You know, otherwise, television only catered to 3 or 4 metropolitan, areas of the country. But then it had become national. It went all over the country, and it started with Bharatik and our 2 major epics. Because India has 2 absolutely what we call our civilizational epics, which is one is Ramayana and the other is Mahabharata. So Ramayana, Mahabharata, and Bharatik Khoj were the 3 major series that we created during that time. People look back, some of the older people now, when they look back and say, that was the time when television was really wonderful. Well, that's of course nostalgia, but the fact is that it was an important phase in the evolution of our television, audiovisual kind of expression as a national enterprise. So that's it. I mean, really, after that, I've just been making films one after the other, and continuing to do that. And now, of course, I'm in my second half of my 80s, so I really am getting on, as they say. But I haven't stopped, and I don't intend to. And I'm doing my new feature just now, which is an Indo-Bangladesh co-production. And it's about the father of the Bangladesh nation, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. It's a it's a biographical film about him, enacted with about actors from Bangladesh acting in it. And we've done about 3/4 of the film, but a little bit of work to do, but that came into difficulties, not because of any other reason except natural ones, because of this COVID problem, different kinds of problems like this. And hopefully, if all goes well, we should be ready with the film early next year.
Thank you. This is very inspiring. Perhaps this is the point to ask you, what about your approach to cinema and also the film, to contextualize a little bit for us, the film Manthan. Because this is what our audience saw just before this, and the National Film Archive of India made available for us, which I should thank. Yeah.
Well, you want me to talk about Manthan just now, or should I? Yeah, okay. Now I'll give you a context. You see, when India became independent, at that time, we were producing very little milk. The country was not producing enough milk for the country, for the people in the country, for children of the country, and so on and so forth. Now, a whole bunch of farmers in a district of Gujarat, which is one of the milk areas of the country, decided to start a cooperative, a milk cooperative, because small-scale film producers, like people having 1 buffalo or 2 buffaloes or 2 cows, or, people like this, poorer section of the population, they got together, they were organized, brought together into a cooperative union, a milk cooperative union, so that they could pool their resources and that would help them to market their product. You see, but otherwise what would happen is that you produce your milk and you would have no market. You wouldn't be able to sell it, unless you yourself went to the city, but that was not possible. So they created a milk producers union, and then with that they would take that milk and supply to the city. Now in Gujarat, it meant 2 or 3 cities of Gujarat where this milk would be sent to sell. And while they were doing that, they were upgrading themselves. They were upgrading themselves. They were not only just selling milk, they were preserving milk. They were making milk powder. They were making baby food. They were making butter. They were making ghee and then cheese and so on, so on, so on. Different kinds of things. And that particular organization, that cooperative union, had called itself Amul. So Amul became a household name. And because of that, and because of the manner in which they had created Amul, the government of India decided that, for all the milk, the potential milk-producing areas of the country, where you had good quality cattle, etc., to create similar kinds of unions. And so a country like India, which was woefully short of milk, at the time of independence, suddenly became, because of this kind of development all over, within a very short period of time, became a milk, a milk producer of significance, where we could export milk and milk products to countries around us. So it was very interesting, and how that whole process developed and that whole story was very interesting to tell. And so I barely kind of fictionalized, and I decided that I would make a film about the story of how Amul developed, and it was called Manthan. And then who was going to finance it? Because the whole thing, the question was, who would market this film? Now the thing was, when I went to film distributors, they said, well, who would want to watch, pay money to watch a film about milk being produced? Farmers creating milk. Is that a story for cinema? So he said, all right, then forget about it. So Dr. Kiran, the man who really created this revolution, this white revolution, this milk revolution in the country, Dr. Kiran, he said, why are you worried about trying to make a film like that? He said, like we have created our milk unions, our own people, our own milk farmers will produce this film. And so that was a very interesting way, because what happened was he just sent a message saying, you don't have to put any money. It's just that when young farmers come and give milk to the union every day, in the morning and in the evening, you just don't take, one time that you have given the milk, don't take money from it. That money will go to become go for production of the film. So we had 500,000 farmers whose one-time supply of milk contributed the entire sum of money to make that film. So nobody felt the pinch. So we made the film. When we made the film, we said we don't have to depend on stars, we don't have to depend on anybody. And Dr. Kiran said you don't even have to depend on marketing the film the way you normally market the film, where you need to have star names or big stars or some big music director or something that will sell the film, where it will become commodity that you can sell easily in the market. He said, don't forget about it. Don't worry about that. The people who have financed the film themselves will come to see the film. And then they're going to come and see the film. Then you can release the film and you will find that they would want to see the film not once, several times, which they did. That's how the film got released. And when the film got released in Gujarat, it not only became a big hit, It was their story. It was their own story. So they saw the film, they made it successful. By making that film successful like that, we could release the film not only all over the country, but eventually that film we premiered, we premiered at the United Nations in New York. And we had a screening for the General Assembly in the United Nations. And having shown the film in the General Assembly, a lot of the countries in different parts of the world, some parts of South America, some countries in South America, some parts in Central America, some parts of Africa, all of them eventually decided that they want to create cooperatives of different kinds. And Manthan became a film that sort of furthered this cause for those countries, whether it was in Central Asia, whether it was in East Asia, whether it was in the parts of Central America maybe, or in Africa. So Manthan became in many ways a kind of ambassador, for development in countries, many countries of the world. So it became part of the UNDP programs, all sorts of things like that. So it was a completely unconventional process. Although it was just a film, and the story of making of a cooperative in one of the districts of Gujarat.
This is fascinating. I'm going to leave some time for Q&A, and we already have raised hands. But so I'll leave some of these questions I have especially about social change and how your film initiated that. But I wonder if you can just maybe connect it to what you were saying, and the way you produced the film is, entirely fascinating, because you didn't do, there's many movements, and especially historically, where there's some kind of, social change and massive social change that took place, and then a film is made about it. And we can see that, in the Western context, from Hollywood, from British cinema, and it's often very biographical and very, quite distant from the facts and from the story itself. Whereas your film is very close to the people, and like you said, it's made by them and for them. Yeah. So this is fascinating. But maybe this ties on to my question: how do you approach then? Does this tie to your natural approach to cinema? Is this something you saw yourself doing even before you came to do the film? Or you mentioned your influences like Eisenstein and Pudovkin. Like, I'm just interested also how this maybe ties to your own approach to filmmaking. And also perhaps, well, let's go with that question first, and then maybe we can have some more time as well. All I was going to say is perhaps we can also tie to this category. I don't know if you like to use it. What I wanted to ask you is, often we hear about Indian parallel cinema. Now, to what extent is this category or name applicable? I don't want you to use it, but it's just, how do you see it? And was there a parallel cinema? What is it,
Well, you see, the idea, the concept of parallel cinema, or somebody named it parallel cinema, was films that were not conventionally made, that were not part of the conventional framework of commercial cinema. Because, Indian cinema has a slightly different history from, let's say, the Western cinema. Different countries have their own kind of history. But in India, what happened was that the urban theater, the urban theater, it just got put on celluloid. That's how cinema started. The talkies began like that. Because, until 1928, 1930, Indian cinema was developing like Indian cinema everywhere else in the world, like silent cinema everywhere else in the world. With the evolution of the kind of language of cinema was being discovered, the grammar of cinema was being created, the way storytelling methods, narrative styles, all these things were evolving, more or less like everywhere else in the world. But when sound came, the moment sound came, the most popular theatrical form, was immediately put on celluloid. And in India, the most popular theatrical form was the urban theatre. And the urban theatre, particularly in cities like Bombay and Calcutta, were kind of melodramatic stories, different kinds of things, or historical epics, etc., retold theatrically. But in order to keep audience interest, you would have small interludes. To tell a story, you would have interludes. The interludes would be a kind of aside. You would have music, maybe a small dance, you may have a little skit, a little comic piece, different kinds of things like that. So it was offering you a kind of a potpourri of entertainment tied together with a film narrative. So that was the style of our films. And so when sound came to India, films started to follow the same pattern. So we had a completely new style of film compared to what was happening internationally. Now there was, although this became very successful, there were young filmmakers who said, this is not cinema. This actually is nothing but film theatre in many ways. They wanted to explore cinema in a way that cinema should develop, it should evolve, because it is an art on its own. It's not simply translating theatre onto celluloid or translating a theatrical form onto celluloid. The idea was that cinema itself was an art form on its own. And so you had to develop that. So when that started to happen, the government of India, independent government of India, started to help that process. And so some films started to be made. But before that, of course, the government of India wouldn't have done that if it wasn't for the fact that there was one particular filmmaker. His name was Satyajit Ray. Now, he decided to make films that were completely and totally away from what the history of cinema in India was. So he was making films, and he was much influenced. He was much influenced at that time by films that were being made in certain parts of the world, like Italy, for instance. Neorealist cinema, post-war neorealist cinema. Or similarly, say, the Nouvelle Vague in France. But he was really a little before the Nouvelle Vague actually developed into a kind of movement in France. But he started making films at that time. And he started making films. He decided to make films that were not only credible, but also to look at, would seem perfectly natural, would have a sense of life, like that you just walk into it like you walk into life, walk out of your home into the life outside. So he started making films like that. Now that became a kind of ambition for a lot of young people at that time. And they wanted to make films of this nature. But they were getting no opportunity because the commercial cinema, which had this kind of song and dance routines and evolved from the theatrical form. Before that, they were commercially very concerned that these films are probably not going to run at all. So the government again stepped in, to help people make films. Help young people making films. Because at that time, we also had a film institutes, first film school. The students of that film school coming out and also looking at the cinema in a very fresh sort of way. And so the government put little bits of money into this and started to make those films. Some character in the press decided to call this parallel cinema. Quite wrongly, actually, because the word parallel does not suit that term. It really is new cinema. Because it was as compared to what is the conventional cinema. This was unconventional cinema. This was a new kind of cinema. And it was not parallel to the old cinema at all. It went away from that.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate you said that. Now, forgive me. The reason I had said it because when you hear a lot about Indian cinema, especially this new cinema that you said, and I like that you said new cinema, because one thing now that helps me as well is when you hear the category parallel cinema, especially in film schools, like let's say not in the West, if we don't want to say in the West generally, let's say at least in Britain and the US, you often think like a cinema that's, like you said, parallel to its own country, which especially given the nature of what you said, the nature of the production, the nature of how it arose, and also the nature of the funding makes no sense. so I really appreciate that you said this, because I think it's very, especially in academic language, it's very easy to categorize films in a certain way, but to forget that they're actually something new. It's actually boxes them away. It makes you think you understand everything, but you don't realize actually what the new thing they bring into cinema and a part of life. So I mean, I really appreciate that you said that. Is there an aspect, maybe a final question, I really don't want our audience to go, and I would like to have them an opportunity to ask as well. But with regard to your role in film education, how did that fit also? Because you said, this is fascinating to me. I'm still trying to pinpoint it, because you said, you worked in advertising, but at the same time, you came from this tradition of this new cinema in a way, of people being influenced by this new cinema. So how do you see yourself and, your work fitting within, I guess, Indian cinema, but also like just your journey in cinema? Like, how do you see your approach forming, especially with respect to Manthan? I'm just wondered, and I'm interested. What would you say? We have a bit of a disconnection. I can't seem to hear you.
Well, you see, in terms of cinema had a form of its own. Can you hear me now? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Yes.
You can? Okay. All right. You see, in terms of cinema, the whole idea that film is autonomous. It is an art form on its own. It has a narrative process that clearly is a kind that cannot be replicated in other forms like theater and so on and so forth. So because it has a language of its own, you have to explore that language. You have to work with it, work there, and you must create your own kind of quality, like writers. Different writers have their own ways of constructing use of that language. Similarly, filmmakers do the same. But they're using images, they're using, moving images in different ways. And they're using different kinds of things. Like, say, for instance, when literary idioms are used, there are also filmmakers use lenses, filmmakers use, to change the dimensions of an image. You use lenses, you use lighting, you change locations, you move from one place to another, you have different points of view. All of these various things become something that you are going to tell a story. To work process is a very important body. The writer writes a story, or how he evolved, or creates from a rag, he creates his own piece of the compositional piece that creates something absolutely new, based on what is actually the rules of a particular scale. Now that kind of thing, So we have in the cinema this kind of process in which we work. Now, this evolution, this particular way of doing it is you can be very original if you can do that. No, I was saying the fact is that you see the idea of cinema that as an autonomous entity, that cinema on its own as an art form on its own, that even that is a transitory process. Even that is a transit. It's not as though, it's not like, you are a painter of murals or you're a painter of a portrait, you're a portrait painter. You can be a filmmaker on a parallel to that kind of thing in the cinema. But cinema is, because it's technological, it's a creature of technology. It changes as technological changes take place. And because it changes as technological things take place, nothing remains the same. Nothing, there is no static position there. It's continuous, it's changing all the time. And and now with the coming of television, it continues to change even faster. And therefore, it's not a settled form of art. It's not a form of art that has settled. It's not like painting. It's a settled form of art. Or frescoes, settled form of painting. Or music. You say you write a concerto, you write a symphony. Now there is certain settled character there. But the fact is, with cinema, there's no such settled character. It's changing all the time because it's entirely based on technology. It's a technological art. Because it's a technological art, because it's also audio-visual, and where there are changes taking place almost every day and continuously. And because of that, it also ages very quickly. Like films that were made yesterday, if you see them today, you feel they're dated. A film made in 1930s and 40s or 20s, when you see them today, you cannot see them as something like when I go to see Mona Lisa, I can see Mona Lisa about thousands of times, but forever it can always remain fresh. But cinema is not fresh like that. If I see a film, if made in 1930s, now when I see it, I say it's dated. It's stuck to its own time. It is not timeless. And the problem with cinema is because it is tied to technology. It does not have a timeless quality. It is stuck to time. And the way it changes with time. And this is a huge problem. On one side, it's a problem. On another side, it's exciting. It's not. It's very exciting because tomorrow is not going to be like today. It's going to be changing, and that's what's the exciting part. But the sad part of it is that what you made yesterday is now dated. It's like a photograph in an album.
But do you think this is fascinating? I love how you kind of worked out both sides. But is there then a part? Can cinema be timeless? Because there are films that you relate to. You mentioned Eisenstein, for example. Is it possible for cinema to also be timeless as well as bound in time because of what it says? Not necessarily yes the technological part, but because of the meaning. Like you said, the life that you see there. Like for example, you mentioned Ray. You still see that life today, or do you think it's changed as well?
No, it doesn't. Some people become timeless because they manage that little, that they move through that sieve in that needle, where the thread moves. So they move out into another world which remains timeless. And there are very, very few films that can do that. Very few films have done that. If you look at the history of the cinema, where you can see a film, not because it was famous at one time, not because of nostalgic reasons, but because it can give you the same fresh experience that you had when you would have seen it first time. But can film do that? Paintings do that to you. Music does that to you.
That's beautiful.
If I listen to a Beethoven symphony, I may have heard it hundreds and hundreds of times before, but every time I hear it, it can also be immediately fresh. And it can also, depending on the conductor who's conducting and the orchestra that is playing, it can give you a dimension that's completely different from it was with some other conductor, another orchestra. But with the cinema, it's a different thing. It is both its limitation as well, but the strength of it is the fact that it is the closest to life. That is the strength that it has. The fact that you can catch a moment of life, freeze it. A real moment in life. Like when we are talking now, this particular moment in life is being frozen forever. Of a particular day, particular time. You there sitting wherever you are, wherever I am, in my office, this moment gets frozen. That does not happen with other arts. It happens with the cinema. It happens with television. So it's a completely different kind of thing altogether. And that's probably the more fascinating part of it.
That's beautiful, and I think that's exactly a note we can finish on and allow maybe some of our audience members to ask questions. I think I've had some notes in the chat, and some people have said, so we had a colleague from the BFI join us. He had to leave sadly, but he's very happy to hear about your kind of reflections on film and the current news, what films you're doing now. So that's a colleague in the programming department. And then there's also Dr. Sangeeta Sen, who's here with us from St. Andrews. I let her ask her a question, but I'll say that her comment in the chat was that nobody could have done a better discovery of India the way you did, sir. That was the finest piece of work in the history of Indian TV. So, Dr. Sen, if you want to ask your question, please feel free.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you remember me, sir. I went to your office and we had about 2 hours of chat sometime in 2017. So yeah, I've been to your place, and thank you very much for your reflections. I was just a comment actually when I was listening to your reflections on Manthan. I was also thinking about another film, Sushman, that you made in 1987, and I think that was also, those are the things, sir, I think there is a disconnection. Yeah. Is it?
No, it was, yeah, I know what because that was also made very similarly.
Yes. And I was thinking about, and I think your attention to people's movement and how such cooperatives played a very important role in making of these films reminds me strongly of Latin American third cinema, because they used to make films in collaboration with miners and in collaboration with different cooperatives. So that brings me to this question of calling the kind of films that you and Mrinal Sen and several of your colleagues used to do as parallel cinema. I think like you said, it is new cinema, right? It's like the new cinema movement all over the world. I don't understand why Indian new cinema is always called Indian parallel cinema. It should have been called Indian new cinema, right? So I was just trying. I was just, if you could just tell us a little bit about, the kind of participation of people in making such films. It is not only state funded. Even people, but practically your films or John Abraham's films. These were the films which were, some of them were literally funded by the people whose stories these were.
Well, John Abraham was much more so than mine, because you see, he was directly approaching people.
Yeah.
And they were putting little bits of money, and then he made the film. In my case, it wasn't like that, because the Manthan was made, fortunately for me, because the Gujarat Cooperative Milk Marketing Federation was there supporting the film and putting money into it. The whole idea was that, you see, in my case, when I was making films like Manthan or Susman, or a couple of other films after that, they were made because people had put the money together. The cooperatives had put the money together in Manthan. You had another group of cooperatives or handloom societies. They had put the money together to make the film, and so on. So it never was like with the John Abrams. The ladies said John Abrams films. He actually went door to door to collect bits of money so that he could make a film. So he made films like that. But the disadvantage of that was that he may have made a film, but he could never get it released. See, John Abraham was an absolutely wonderful human being, but he was like a Sufi, he was like a wandering minstrel. He was an absolutely delightful human being. He was really like God's person. He was very, he was a very evolved human being. A lot of people would call him crazy, but I think he was just a beautiful human being.
Also, your Kalyug, that film, I can never forget that film. It's like that rendition of the Mahabharata, and you did it. I mean, it's epic. It's so epical, and anybody who has, those references that keep coming to our head, but it's also so contemporary, isn't it? So if you could, I think you are very fascinated about the epical traditions of India, because in Bharate Khoj, you used that, the attire of people. They're so striking, and that's why I think I was also in the audience of the Mahabharata when it was being telecast, and I used to watch with my grandfather your Bharata Khoj, which used to be telecast between 1 and 2 in the afternoon. So they are so strikingly different, and there's a very wonderful kind of authenticity, and obviously it's also your interpretation of the epical tradition. So would you like to tell us a little bit more about how these epical traditions are so embedded in Indian cultural sensibilities that you don't have to give any background knowledge when you make films and with such references? I think that's something very unique about Indian cinema, that we refer to epics constantly.
Yeah. Well, you see, you have to distinguish between two things. One is you have mythology. On the other, you have history. Now, the historical use of history is, one that keeps changing. But what mythology does is to make it constant. See, so the mythic traditions, they remain, history changes. So we have our mythic traditions, like the Greeks have their mythic traditions. Now, those are the ones that are abiding, because those are the ones that also tell us more about ourselves. You know, because history is a changeable, it's constantly changing. But what remains, what remains and keeps renewing itself is mythology. And so we have our great myths. We have, like Ramayana, Mahabharata are the two major, and they are foundational myths of India. So you have these foundational myths on which everything kind of branches out from all of that. In fact, all our stories branch out from that. Now, those are things that I find very, very fascinating. And that is where, and that's endless. It isn't as though it has an end. There is no end to it. But what is interesting in all of that is that this is the unifying factor that gives it a certain unity to the cultures that are represented. And therefore, so when you say, what represents India best? What represents us, South Asia, best? I would say, basically, Mahabharata. Mahabharata tells us about how the entire country, it defines the East and the West, defines the North and the South, while Ramayana defines the North and South, because it's a movement and it gives you the limits of the culture of India, North-South culture of India, while this defines everything. Mahabharata defines everything, the entire South Asian phenomena, cultural phenomenon of South Asia. Now, if you look at it like that, you will find that it contains everything. So, like somebody, I don't remember who it was, but somebody who said, if it is not in Mahabharata, it is not in life. Which is true, because it's got everything.
There is a saying in Bangla, "Ja nei Bharote, ta nei Bharote," which means, whatever is not present in the Mahabharata, it doesn't exist in India. That's true. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sen. If we have another question from Dr. Radovich, please.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much, Mr. Benegal. That was wonderful, truly, and I really appreciate. And I'm sure many people who will hear this afterwards will be thrilled to learn so much from you. I actually just have a basic question, because you answered most of my questions, actually. I wondered if you can tell me a bit about, well, actually, you mentioned the film language and grammar of cinema, and I wondered if there is difference between the two, because it seems that you know more than many film theorists, that you can help us with that. And also, how do you see the future of cinema, the author cinema? Because this is something that is shockingly decreasing in some parts of the world, like the author cinema. And I also had, if I may involve Dr. Sen, Sangeeta, the question about Indian cinema and its representations and perceptions in Western academia. Sometimes it feels it does not do justice to the great film authors such as Mr. Benegal that we are honored to have here. Thank you.
Well, you see, it is not that. Of course, these are views and attitudes. I'm not really worried about all of that too much. But what is interesting always is that between cultures, any kind of dialogue between cultures has to be undertaken on the basis that mine may probably be even unequal to yours, may even be lesser than yours, but not if I take the other position that mine is superior than yours, which is the normal position that everybody takes, then there is nothing you will learn. So if it's a question of wanting a dialogue, it means that you have to take either a position of equality or of somebody who wishes to learn. And when you wish to learn, you have your palms like this. You don't have your palms like this. You don't keep your hands closed, you keep your hands open. You have to keep your mind open. So it's a very simple thing, really, because most of us, whenever we take a position, we have already closed our minds. There is never a position when we should close our minds. There is always something to be discovered, something to be learned. And the moment you look at life like that, you will always see the dawn. Otherwise you will not see the dawn. You won't see the sunrise. You have to see the sunrise. When I say you have to see the sunrise, you have to see the sunrise that it's like it's happening the first time in your life. You have to look at it like that. That's the process of discovery. And that's also the process of creativity. Every time, whatever you do, if it does not feel like the first time, then it's not worth doing. It's as simple as that.
Thank you very much. That's simple, very true. I mean, but it's not always. Yes, thank you so much. Which brings me to actually, before Dr. Sen replies, just before, and I don't want to forget actually the question. So the author cinema, your work has the power, actually, would you agree, to communicate almost in a poetic level, if poetry can be taken, and I'm quoting somebody else, I forgot whom, but as the perhaps highest way of communication of something that of human soul, of human condition. So would you agree that there is this element as well, like that makes cinema and film and your film something different to any other form of media or art in general?
See, you use the word human condition. The understanding of the human condition, there's never a last word there. Because, the human condition is one that is perpetually of interest. It's always of interest. And, if you can get that, and if I can present the human condition in a way where it is not as though it's a repetition. Because the human condition for me is different from the human condition for you. It's for each one of us. And if it is so, then every time it is new. It is not the same. And because it's not the same, it still is worth it. That's why, that's why there's literature. That's why there's storytelling. That's why there's cinema. That's why there's anything worth doing, because it always presents the human condition.
Thank you. That is wonderful, Mr. Benegal. I wonder if we have anyone else to ask. Yes, Sangeeta, please go on.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about, I mean, obviously, Benegal sir, I don't know, I mean, he is very modest, so he won't be saying that. But I think, several of your films are so transcendental in a way, because I have watched each one of your films. And I haven't had the opportunity of watching all your documentaries, which is a huge corpus, simply because I don't have access to them. But I have a collection of your films. You gave me a couple of them actually when I met you. So I mean, some films are transcendental. Like for example, I watched Bhumika, and again and again and again. So it's Nishant, for example, and there are so many films, even Arohan, that's another film which is, I mean, just so different. And Kalyug is one of my all-time favorite. Jubeda, then that is Welcome to Sajjanpur. I keep following you and watching this film. So yes, I think there is an element of transcendentality, because whatever human conditions you represent, I find that relatable. So I think for me, to engage with the form of cinema is, that relatability is important for me as a member of the audience, right? So and we are so thankful to you. Coming back to Milia's question of, rather overlooking of that Indian treasure of, filmmaking, film culture, cinephilia. We have a fantastic cinephilia in India. I think one of the problems is that, it's this still a kind of, colonial bent of mind, thinking in colonial bent of mind, where each film culture, particularly with reference to the West with a capital W, right? I'm not talking about any particular location. I'm trying to think about a conceptualization, a way of conceptualization. And India is not free from that as well, right? So what I'm saying is, in the West, from each film culture, there can only be one filmmaker who will be highlighted. And, Benegal sir will agree with me. In India, we are so fortunate to have outstanding authors, outstanding filmmakers, on all parts of the country. And India has, apart from the so-called Bollywood that, everybody knows about, India has 6 other sprawling film industries. And, the question of authorism, I mean, I have slight discomfort with the question of authorism. I would be very comfortable calling them artists, okay? So, yeah, right. So I think this is a huge problem of attitude when we think about filmmakers from one culture. So even when we create canon, create syllabus, there is space for only one filmmaker. Only when we form certain, syllabus, and then we talk to our students, Meena will be able to tell you that, I told him about many other filmmakers, as I was teaching, right? So that's very personal. But in institutional level, you don't see this initiative. So that is why I say, the syllabus needs to be decolonized. The thought has to decolonize itself. Not, just individual effort will not do. There needs to be a recognition of, these kinds of treasures in different cinematic cultures, right? So yeah, that was my 2 pence.
Thank you, Dr. San. Sorry, Mr. Benegal, that's very important. Actually, I was born in Yugoslavia. And, many works also on that cinema, and then post-Yugoslav cinema and so on. And I can relate to what you're saying. So maybe it's like West from India, but I wouldn't as it wasn't put in the West anyway. So I wouldn't put it either. So I can relate. But I wondered if Mr. Benegal, I'm sorry, I'm so much onto it. Is there a difference? It's just because I don't know, and I would like to know. Is there a difference between film language and film grammar, or is it interchangeable?
Ultimately, the grammar of film is like grammar of language. It's like you're speaking to me, I can understand what you're saying. I can understand what you're saying because you're speaking to me grammatically in a particular way that I can understand. It may not be, you may not be using the conventional grammar, but you are grammatical anyway, because what you are saying is making sense to me. If I do something that makes sense to you, then I'm within the grammar of that language. You know, it's a fairly simple thing. We complicate matters unnecessarily. The important thing here is that when we speak to one another, when we write to one another, we write a book or we paint a picture, we do any of these things, we have to have something in common. Something in common because that can connect us. Otherwise, there is no connection whatsoever. Now that connection comes, what is it that makes that connection? The common humanity. According to me, it's a common humanity which works in every field, from the smallest to the largest, from microcosmic levels to macrocosmic levels. You know, it's a common humanity. It is something. I speak to you and you listen to me. When you listen to me, you make sense of what I'm saying. If you don't listen to me, you will not make any sense of what I'm saying. You know, your willingness to listen is somewhere close to my willingness to talk to you. You know, now that is what creates communication of value. If people are unwilling to listen and you keep talking, who are you talking to? To the birds? You know, now that is the point. The point is that ultimately we have to find ways of communicating with each other. And in that, the final point is if we can communicate each other with the aesthetics that we're capable of. You know, there is an art in all of this. And that art is what we should concentrate on. That's what makes life beautiful. That's what makes life complete. That's what makes us all feel good about living. You know, are we capable of doing that? And that requires only one thing. It requires the acceptance that there is a basic humanity in everybody. You know, there is somewhere, and what is basic, when I talk about basic humanity means what? We're talking about simple things, ordinary things, compassion. You know, you have to be a compassionate person. Without that, there's no great art. Without that, there's no great music. You know, otherwise it's only noise. So it's the same sort of thing. It's ordinary things, very ordinary but very important. Compassion being the most important. A compassionate life, looking at the world compassionately, looking at each other with a sense of humanity. Now this is all that is required. You know, everything else follows. That's it. I mean, it's not difficult.
Thank you very much. That is enlightening, actually. Thank you.
So beautiful. Wonderfully put, really. Sir, can I ask you another question about your film on Mujibur Rahman?
Yeah.
Sir, when can we expect it to watch?
Well, I hope we should be ready with it by early next year. It should have been ready by now. Unfortunately, in our part of the world, we've had so many problems.
Yeah.
We've had unfortunate climate. We have had this dreadful epidemic that has been there, and we haven't been able to get rid of it yet. We hope we will. Now, all these things have come in the way. Transport, travel, all become a bit difficult. So many things like that. Otherwise, you see, about 70 to 75% of the film is ready. Yeah, I had already finished shooting that, but I have some work to be done in Bangladesh, and I can only do that when things open up.
True.
Yeah, so that's the only thing. I'm enjoying doing it because you see, we have such exceptionally fine actors in Bangladesh.
Oh yeah.
Exceptionally fine actors. They have a wonderful tradition. Actually, a wonderful tradition of theatre, and which I think allows for the evolution and development of absolutely first-rate actors.
Yeah.
Which in some ways is common to our part of Bengal as well. The fact is that this is a great tradition there. Yeah. Because I find that the actors that I've been working with are such outstanding actors, each one of them, and it's very rare to have a bunch of actors of that level of talent working with you. It's a great pleasure to work with people like that.
Yeah. And this is in Bangla, sir?
Yes, it is. Okay. It is in Bangla. And I had to do this in Bangla for a very simple reason.
Yeah.
They had not insisted what language I should do it in. The reason I decided to do it in Bangla was because Bangladesh was formed on the basis of language.
I completely agree. Yes, sir. Yeah,
That's why.
And also, I think this film is going to be very widely accepted by the audiences of Bangladesh because, they value their language so much. I think, it's just, Mujibur Rahman has been, he's called Bongo Bandhu. And then, the father of the nation, and I think this biopic needs to be seen, particularly when both Bangladesh and India, we are going through tremendous sociological and cultural crisis. So a figure like Bangabandhu needs to, rekindle something which will tell us the importance of harmony and, coexistence and all these things. I'm so grateful to you for making this film. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sangeeta. I wanted to say to Mr. Benegal, thank you very much for this, because I love that you told us how cinema and all art and all life must come from a place of compassion and from love. So this is very inspiring and very liberating. Sangeeta did mention, yes, I have to thank Sangeeta, Dr. Sen, because she really opened the door for me to the treasure that is Indian cinema. And we've done several collaborations here with Liberating Cinema in the past. We showed the work of John Abraham, Rita Gata, Pradipta Bhattacharya, and Indrashish Acharya most recently, who's joined our board as well. So I'm very grateful. Thank you, Mr. Benegal. I wondered if you wanted to add something or if we had any other questions. Please feel free. Yeah.
Well, I think we've come to the end of this.
Yes. No, I think we're about the time. I'm looking at the time, so maybe we should come to the end. But I think the way you finished and your reflections were very, very helpful to me personally as well. But I think they'll be very helpful to our audience as well. And I think from this, I would like also to recommend. So just from your films, because we're here in the UK, we have some access. I hope we'll be able to show your new film when it comes out. I'm sure it will first go through the cinemas. But if you also allow us to show it, hopefully we can bring it to our audience here and in the UK. So, one thing I just wanted to say to people who use Mubi in the UK, you can still watch Mr. So We can still watch Manthan through our website. National Film Archive of India has been very helpful. And I have to say in memory of Mr. Dhiwar as well, because he reposed while sending us in the process of sending us the film.
Some of these films, as you know, are available on YouTube.
Yes, some are
available on YouTube. Has been available for a long time.
Okay, well, yes, no, thank you very much for saying, because I need to check as well myself. Some are on YouTube. All I wanted to say was that on Mubi, there's Ankur, Bhumika, Mandi, and Nishant. They're all available on there.
They're all available.
They're all
available now, yes, freely. I mean, you don't have to, you'll get them on YouTube. I mean, similarly, the government of India decided that Bharati Khoj would also be available freely like that. You know, that you don't have to pay for it.
That will be super. That will be so good.
And I would love personally to watch this history of India. If it is possible to find somehow one day, this will be enlightening for me, and I think for audience as well. I should say that the masterclass, so it will be available afterwards through our website, through our YouTube channel, and then you can share it on. And obviously, I think with colleagues and everyone else who might be interested, I think they'll be able to really learn from you about cinema, about new Indian cinema, and also about really your work, and that you're really a master of cinema. So we're really grateful to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you.